Boston, in the last days of the year, was cold to the bone. Wind blew in from the Charles River, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts, wood smoke, and the strange melancholy of those about to cross a threshold in their lives. My name is Alara Vance. I was 29 that year, a senior accountant for a construction equipment import company in Boston. From the outside, many would say my life was stable. A respectable job, the old house my parents left me, a small stock portfolio in my name, and I was about to marry into a wealthy family. But people often judge the contents by the cover, like picking the shiniest apple at the market. Its skin is flawless and bright red. But when you take a bite, you realize it's mealy and rotten to the core. I was orphaned at 10. After the funeral, the person who took me home wasn't some distant aunt or uncle, but my brother, Caleb Vance. He was only 19 then, barely having lived his own life before he had to learn how to be a father, a mother, an older brother, and the very pillar I clung to. Caleb loved me, I knew that, but his love was purely practical, stripped of any warmth. Every morning he'd make me scrambled eggs, but they were always either burnt at the edges or runny in the middle. When the weather turned cold, he'd bark a single sentence. Put on a coat. When I had a stomachache, he'd run out to buy medicine, place it on the table and say, "Take this. Don't be stubborn." Once, I asked him, "Caleb, can't you say anything a little nicer?" He was dicing onions and didn't look up. "Nicer? Is that going to break your fever?" I was so exasperated I almost laughed. My brother was like that, so clumsy it was infuriating. But if anyone so much as touched me, he'd drop everything, even a meal he was halfway through, to come running. They say siblings are your flesh and blood, but my blood ran a bit cold. Sometimes we'd step on each other's toes without even apologizing. Then I met Julian Croft. Julian wasn't like the rich men I'd imagined. He didn't flaunt watches, talk about cars, or throw money in people's faces. For our first dinner date, he took me to a small, acclaimed ramen shop in a quiet alley. He said, "You're an accountant. You must be tired of looking at numbers all day. Let's eat something light so you can sleep well tonight." It was such a simple sentence, but I never forgot it. When a person has been deprived of affection for too long, just having someone remember what you like to eat or that you're sensitive to the cold is enough to make your heart soften like a wafer in water. Julian knew I was an orphan. He didn't avoid the topic, nor did he pity me excessively. On the anniversary of my parents' death, he drove me to the cemetery himself. He stood behind me for a long time, not rushing, not asking. When I finished placing the flowers, he set down a bouquet of white lilies and said softly, "Mr. and Mrs. Vance, please rest assured. I will take care of Alara from now on." My throat tightened at his words, not because they were flowery, but because they touched my weakest point. In the 2 years we dated, Julian never once raised his voice at me. When I was upset, he listened in silence. When I worried about the money to repair the old house, he said, "The house your parents left you, you can keep it as it is. Having a place to remember them by is a precious thing." The more I listened, the more I believed. In this day and age, meeting a man who didn't demand I sell my parents' old house to buy a new condo felt like I'd struck gold. Though in hindsight, that gold was perhaps just very well plated. Julian's mother, Eleanor Croft, charmed me even more. The first time I visited their villa in a riverside suburb, Mrs. Croft came to the gate to greet me. She wore a soft cashmere sweater in a taupe color, her hair in a low chignon, a string of pearls in her hand. Her face was kind, her voice as gentle as water being poured into a porcelain cup. "Alara, my dear, come in. It's so cold and your hands are freezing." I flinched when I heard her call me my dear in that maternal tone. It had been almost 20 years since anyone had spoken to me like that. I mumbled, "Hello, Mrs. Croft." She smiled and pulled me inside. "None of that Mrs. Croft business. We'll be one family soon enough. If you don't mind, just call me Eleanor." I looked down, my eyes suddenly stinging. A person's weakness can be so ridiculous sometimes. Someone just has to offer you the right scarf when you're shivering, and you mistake a fleeting moment of warmth for a lifetime of safety. From that day on, Eleanor would often call to ask if I'd eaten, if work was tiring. On Sundays, she'd invite me over to teach me how to arrange hydrangeas, make ciopino, or bake sourdough. She'd say, "Being a daughter-in-law in a family with standards isn't about suffering, dear. If you know how to manage a home, your husband will cherish you, and the family will be warm." I laughed as I chopped vegetables. "Eleanor, teach me slowly, or I'll have a meltdown. I'm an accountant, used to tapping keyboards. Making these perfect little appetizers is as stressful as closing the books at the end of the month." She laughed, patting my shoulder lightly. You're a delightful girl. This house has been missing a daughter's laughter for too long. Her words hit me right where I was most vulnerable. I began to imagine I truly belonged in that house. I imagined coming home from work each evening to someone asking what I wanted for dinner, a mother-in-law showing me how to season the soup, a husband waiting by the tea table, a complete home. The one thing I had craved my entire life, so much that I never dared to speak of it. Julian's father, Donovan Croft, was completely different. He was a man of few words, tall, with silvering hair at his temples, and eyes that always seemed to be weighing you up. During the first dinner I had at their home, he only asked me a few questions about my job, about Caleb, and about my parents' old house. His voice was deep, not harsh, but every word made me sit up straighter. At the end of the meal, he put down his chopsticks, looked at me, and said, "When the Croft family accepts someone, they become one of us. You can rest easy, Miss Vance." I quickly replied, "Yes, thank you, sir." Eleanor, sitting beside me, prompted gently, "Call him Donovan, dear. My husband may seem stern, but he loves his children dearly." I shyly murmured, "Donovan." Mr. Croft nodded, without a smile. At the time, I just thought all powerful businessmen were that serious. I didn't know that some of the quietest people are the most dangerous, because they are accustomed to letting others do the crying for them. Only Caleb was unhappy. The evening I brought home the proofs from our engagement photo shoot to show him. He held each photo and looked at it for a long time. In the pictures, I was wearing a simple white dress, standing next to Julian under a canopy of flowers. Julian looked at me so tenderly that even I felt my heart melt looking at it again. I asked, "Aren't they beautiful?" Caleb put the stack of photos down on the table, his face as taut as a guitar string. "I'd be happy with anyone you marry, but not this family." I was stunned. "There you go again. You've only met Julian a few times. How can you say that?" He looked straight at me. "That family is not simple." I let out a laugh, but it caught in my throat. "Not simple? What does that mean? They're too rich, so you don't like them? Or do you think I'm not good enough?" Caleb's brow furrowed. "Alara, don't twist my words." "Then be clear. What's your reason for forbidding me to marry him?" He fell silent. His silence that day hurt me more than any scolding ever could. I felt like that orphan child again, wanting to step out of the cramped kitchen and into a new family, only to have my one and only relative stand blocking the door. I gathered the photos, my voice trembling. "If you don't want me to be happy, just say so." Caleb stood up, his hand gripping the side of a chair. "I'm just afraid you'll get hurt." "I'm used to being hurt." I shot back, my words sharper than I intended. "But this time, I want to choose for myself." The small kitchen fell silent. The pot of kale soup on the stove bubbled, the smell of ginger warming the air, but all I felt was cold. Caleb looked at me for a long time, his eyes a mixture of anger and helplessness. Finally, he spoke slowly. "Alara Vance, some traps aren't set with wire. They're set with sweet words." I turned away, clutching the photos to my chest. At that moment, I thought my brother was overly suspicious, and that I was on the brink of happiness. Remembering it now, I understand. An outsider sometimes sees more clearly than someone in love. But the problem is, when your heart is already set on running into the fire, who's willing to believe the smell of smoke? That night, I couldn't sleep. I laid the engagement photos on my old desk, right next to a plastic flower vase that had faded years ago. In the photo, I was smiling so brightly that looking at it for a long time felt strange, as if the woman in the picture was someone else, not the girl who had just argued with her brother in the small kitchen. Caleb was still in the living room. I heard him open the medicine cabinet, then the sound of a glass on the table. He had stomach problems whenever he was stressed, but he would never admit it. That man could handle countless complex cases out in the world, but at home, he couldn't manage a single kind word to his sister. God really does hand out different skill sets. My brother's talent for comforting words must have been on back order when they were being distributed. I opened my door and leaned against the frame. "Caleb." He turned around, a cup of warm water in his hand. "Why aren't you asleep? I'm asking you one last time. Why won't you let me marry Julian?" He looked at me, his eyes weary. "I didn't say you can't, I just told you to reconsider. So you still don't approve." He was silent for a few seconds, then put the glass down. "There are things I can't tell you yet. But the Croft family, especially Apex Developments, isn't as clean as you think." I laughed, but my heart felt tight. Saying that is the same as saying nothing. What does not clean mean? Construction companies and big projects always have rumors. You work in that sector, so you suspect everyone. This isn't just a rumor. Then what is it? Caleb looked out the window, where the streetlights cast shadows on the old sycamore trees. He spoke very quietly. There are signs of financial misconduct. Convoluted contracts, shell companies, non-transparent land records. That's all I can say. I froze. A part of me wanted to ask more, but a larger part felt insulted. I thought he was using his job to scare me. Do you have proof? If you don't have proof, don't talk about them like that. Don't you see how Julian treats me? You know how his mother cares for me. He turned back abruptly. How long have you known them to know if it's real or fake? That question was like a spark. I stepped fully into the living room, my voice rising. So, because you raised me, you have the right to decide who truly loves me. You're afraid that once I'm married, you won't be able to control me anymore, right? Caleb's face went pale. I knew I had gone too far, but the words were out and couldn't be taken back. The human tongue is a strange thing. In anger, it loves to be a knife, and then it expects the wound to heal on its own. He said slowly, I never wanted to control your life. I just don't want you to walk into danger. I gave a bitter laugh. The most dangerous thing for me right now is to keep living in your fear. Caleb stood there, silent. It was the first time I had ever seen him so utterly helpless. He didn't scold or shout, only his eyes turned a very faint red. I went back to my room and closed the door. That night, I cried. Not because I had stopped loving Julian, but because I felt trapped between two men who both claimed to love me. One gave me the feeling of being chosen, the other always made me feel like I was being held back. The next morning, Julian came to pick me up for a final wedding dress fitting. The moment he saw my face, he asked, Did you argue with Caleb again? I bowed my head to fasten my helmet strap. He still doesn't like your family. Julian didn't seem angry. He sighed and gently adjusted the collar of my jacket. Caleb loves you, that's why he worries. If I had a sister, I'd probably be just as protective. I looked up at him. You're not upset? Julian smiled. A smile so kind it soothed my heart. Of course I am. But I'm marrying you, not his immediate approval. We'll just live well, and Caleb will come to understand. Tears welled up in my eyes. A man who was being suspected by my brother didn't say a single bad word about him. At that moment, I thought, what more could you ask for in a man? It's true, when you're in love, your ability to rationalize is superhuman, better than the most skilled lawyer. While I was sitting on the back of Julian's motorcycle, holding a bouquet of sample wedding flowers and imagining my impending happiness, a secret meeting was taking place on the 23rd floor of the Apex Developments Tower. Only later, when everything fell apart, did I hear about it from case files and testimonies. In the meeting room that day were only Donovan Croft, Eleanor Croft, Julian, and their lawyer, Mr. Atherton. On the screen was a map of the Moonlight Cove Waterfront Development Project. A piece of land, marked in red, sat squarely in the way of a planned secondary access road. That was the parcel my parents had left me. Donovan Croft tapped his pen on the table. Without this parcel, the zoning adjustment application remains stalled. The bank won't release more funds. And the contractors are breathing down our necks for payment every day. Lawyer Atherton pushed his glasses up his nose. If Miss Vance voluntarily transfers the property or grants power of attorney after the marriage, things will be much easier. But with her brother in law enforcement, we have to take the scenic route. Eleanor, sitting beside him, fingered her pearls, her voice as soft as ever. That girl has been without a mother since she was little. She's not afraid of being poor, she's afraid of being abandoned. If you want her to sign something, don't force her with money. Force her with affection. Julian looked up. Mom, I don't think we need to go that far. Alara trusts me. Donovan looked at his son, his eyes cold. Trust is one thing. Paperwork is another. Julian fell silent. Eleanor leaned in, her voice soft but sharp. Julian, if you care for her, you must act quickly. Once she's part of our family, I will gently persuade her. A woman, once she calls you mother, won't have the heart to refuse many things. Julian clenched his fist. In his later testimony, he said he felt uneasy at that moment. But unease without standing up, without protesting, without telling me, is just a decorative conscience. Pretty, but useless. Donovan ended the meeting with one sentence. A woman's affection won't pay off a bank loan. No one said another word. and that very silence laid the first stone of the trap meant for me. That same afternoon, Eleanor called me over for dinner. That evening, she made clam chowder, baked cod, and a small dish of pickled vegetables. All simple dishes, placed in the middle of the vast opulent villa, looking both warm and strange. She put a piece of fish in my bowl. "Eat, Alara, you're too thin. When you're my daughter-in-law, I'll have to fatten you up." I smiled. "If you keep feeding me like this, I won't fit into my wedding dress." Eleanor smiled back, and then took a sapphire bracelet from a velvet box. She fastened it on my wrist, slowly, as if performing a ritual. "I've had this for a long time. This family has no daughters, and I always wondered who would be fitting to wear it. Today, I'm giving it to you." I was flustered. "Eleanor, this is too precious. I can't accept it." She held my hand, her eyes glistening. "Please, accept it. From now on, I'll be a mother to you. Don't think of yourself as an orphan anymore." "You here?" I bowed my head, a tear falling onto the back of my hand. The bracelet was cool against my skin, but my heart was warm with happiness. I didn't know that some gifts aren't for love, but to mark the prey. They say you catch more flies with honey, but at that moment, all I saw was the sweetness, oblivious to the fact that my wings were already stuck in the trap. After Eleanor put the sapphire bracelet on my wrist, my heart completely softened. I wore it to work, occasionally glancing down at my wrist, feeling as if it added a little warmth of family. A colleague even teased, "Alara, you're different these days. Your face is glowing as if there's a flashlight inside." I smiled without hiding it. "It's because I'm getting married." I never imagined that in life, when you're too happy, you become careless. It's like grocery shopping. You see a bunch of vibrant green vegetables and forget to check the bottom for rot. About a week before the wedding, Eleanor called me early in the morning. "Alara dear, could you come over this afternoon? I've asked the tailor to come for your final dress fitting. We can also discuss the reception menu and the family ceremony. A daughter should pay attention to these things." I was checking a list of accounts payable, and hearing her gentle voice, I immediately agreed. "Of course, I'll come right after work." "Good, you come over. I'll make some creme brulee for you. You mentioned you liked it the other day." Just that one sentence was enough to make me feel remembered. I hung up, my lips still unconsciously smiling. Perhaps to others, a mother-in-law remembering her future daughter-in-law's favorite dessert is nothing. But for me, it filled a huge void. That afternoon, the lights in the Croft Villa were on early. The living room smelled of jasmine tea, and on the table were candied ginger, melon seeds, and an artfully arranged platter of artisanal cheeses. Eleanor was wearing a velvet dress, the color of ripe plum, her hair still neat. Seeing me walk in, she took my hand and pulled me to sit down. "Are you cold? Your hands are freezing again. That's a girl who works in an office for you. Always lacking warmth." I smiled. "I'm used to it." "Eleanor, used to it? What do you mean used to it? Once you're in this house, I'll have to fatten you up and get some color in your cheeks." The remark was so ordinary and affectionate that I felt no suspicion at all. She brought me a small creme brulee, spooning it out herself as if I were still a child. A little later, the lawyer, Mr. Atherton, arrived. I had seen him a few times at Donovan's company during large dinners, but that day he was dressed very formally, carrying a shiny black leather briefcase. As soon as he sat down, he smiled politely. "Hello, Alara. I'm just here today to assist the family with some premarital procedures. It will be quick." I hesitated slightly. "What procedures?" Eleanor put down her teacup, her voice still gentle. "Oh, in a family with a large business? Many things need to be clear, my dear. It's not because we don't trust each other, but so that husband and wife can live more comfortably later on, without mixing feelings with paperwork." Mr. Atherton opened his briefcase and took out a neatly clipped file. "This is a prenuptial agreement. The main purpose is to establish the separate property of each party before the wedding to avoid any unintended disputes later. In a way, it's also to protect you." I took the file and flipped through the first few pages. The dense text made my eyes ache. As an accountant, I wasn't illiterate when it came to documents, but these kinds of legal papers always give you the feeling that if you miss one line, you'll misunderstand the whole page. I hesitated. Could I maybe take this home to read over for a night? The atmosphere at the table fell silent for a beat. Just a very slight one, but looking back now, I see it was a crucial moment. Eleanor immediately placed her hand on mine. "It's right to be careful, dear, but I've had this prepared meticulously. We're making things clear from the start so you won't be at a disadvantage later. If you take it home, Caleb might read it and think our family is being calculating with you. I bit my lip. She had hit on my biggest dilemma. If Caleb saw this, he would surely object, and right before the wedding, I didn't want things to get tense again. Mr. Atherton pushed the file towards me, flipping through the sections, his voice steady. The first page is the information of both parties. The next section confirms existing separate property. Your old house is still yours. Your stocks are still yours. Julian also has his separate assets. The general principle is that what belongs to each person stays with that person. Hearing that, I felt somewhat reassured. Is there anything disadvantageous for me in this? He gave a very professional smile. If there were, would the family dare ask you to sign it right before the wedding? We're about to become one family after all. There are just a few general clauses in the appendix, mainly about standards of conduct. If one party seriously harms the honor and reputation of the other, every family has that, Alara. As he spoke, he quickly flipped through the last few pages, so fast that my eyes only caught a glimpse of the tiny print. I was still hesitant. Eleanor suddenly let out a soft sigh, her voice dropping. I'm just afraid of one thing, Alara. Outsiders will think that because you're an orphan, you'll be at a disadvantage coming into a wealthy family. I want it so that if anyone says anything in the future, you can hold your head high and say, my husband's family is honorable and clear. They wouldn't let me lose a single penny. Hearing the word orphan, my heart clenched. She held my hand, her eyes welling up. If your own mother were still here, she would want you to be married properly, with transparent paperwork so no one could bully you. I didn't give birth to you, but if you'll let me, I want to take care of that for you. I bowed my head. Her words struck the weakest place in my heart. I suddenly felt that if I hesitated now, it would be like betraying her kindness. It's true what they say, you can bend the soft and break the hard. But that day, the one who was soft wasn't her, it was me. I picked up the pen, then I'll sign. Eleanor smiled gently. Mr. Atherton immediately turned the document and pointed to each spot. Sign here, and here, Alara. And finally, sign to acknowledge the appendix. I signed each line, my hand trembling slightly, but my mind simply thought I was completing a necessary premarital procedure. I even comforted myself. Better safe than sorry. A family with means has to be thorough. After I finished, Eleanor pulled me into an embrace. Good girl. Now I can rest easy. I leaned my head on her shoulder, smelling the faint scent of her perfume and the jasmine tea still lingering in the room. In that moment, I truly believed I was about to have a mother. But as I lifted my head, I accidentally caught Eleanor's gaze as she glanced at Mr. Atherton. It was just a quick look, as cold as a needle's tip passing over fabric. Before I could understand, she was smiling again, and Mr. Atherton was smoothly putting the documents back into his briefcase. As I was leaving, putting on my shoes in the foyer, Eleanor called after me. The weather is turning cold, dear. Remember to soak your feet in warm water tonight. Don't stay up too late. I turned and smiled. I know, Eleanor. The sapphire bracelet on my wrist tapped lightly against my handbag. I walked out the gate with a sense of relief, as if I had just completed an important task for my wedding. It was only much later that I understood. That day, I hadn't just signed a stack of papers. I had signed away my trust and handed it to the very people who were waiting for me to let my guard down so they could tighten the noose. I always thought the most valuable thing my parents left me was the old house on a small street near the Back Bay Fens. The house was about 925 square feet. Its walls had faded, and parts of the shingled roof had to be temporarily supported with iron bars. Every rainy season, water would leak into a corner of the kitchen. Caleb would climb up to patch the roof, grumbling the whole time. This house must have been a pond in a past life. The minute it rains, it remembers its old job. I'd stand below holding the ladder, laughing until my stomach hurt. Poor as it was, old as it was, that house held the sound of my mother calling me to dinner, the sight of my father fixing an electric fan, and the image of a 19-year-old Caleb peeling boiled eggs for me after the funeral. That's why whenever anyone asked if I'd sell, I shook my head. Besides the house, my parents also left for my brother and me a stock portfolio worth over $120,000. Caleb said, "This is from Mom and Dad for you. It's in your name. I have a salary, I'm not starving, so I won't fight you for it." I argued, "You raised me. How can you say it's all mine?" He just replied curtly, "Raising you is my job. The assets are a matter for the law." Talking to my brother was often like trying to get a form certified at a government office. Every sentence was dry but solid. He did everything with clarity, including love. The thing I paid the least attention to was a parcel of land along the Mystic River on the outskirts of the city. My father had bought it years ago, back when the area was sparse, with dirt roads that turned to mud up to your ankles in the rainy season. The plot was about half an acre, surrounded by a few banana trees, some old apple trees, and a small path leading to the riverbank. I only remember flying kites there with my father as a child. The wind was so strong the kite string would cut into my hand. My father would laugh. "This land, keep it for yourself later. People can trick you out of many things, but you have to know how to hold on to land that's in your name." I was little then and just listened for fun. Later, as I grew up, I saw the land more as a memory than an asset. I didn't know its value had changed so much, and I certainly didn't know it was located exactly where Apex Developments needed to build a secondary road for their Moonlight Cove urban development project. I only understood these things later, when I read the investigation files and heard the testimonies in the interrogation room. The Moonlight Cove project was being advertised by Apex as a model riverside community with parks, a marina, schools, and a shopping center. They painted a beautiful picture, as if buying a unit there would automatically turn a new page in one's life. But behind the glossy billboards was an empty shell. Apex was short on cash flow by about $18 million. Debt to the bank, debt to subcontractors, high-interest private loans, plus a series of shady payments to push the project's paperwork through faster. Some plots within the zoned area had unclean titles, and a few internal roads were blocked by residents. My land was right where they needed to open the secondary road to the river. Without it, the revised zoning plan wouldn't be clean. Without a clean plan, the bank wouldn't release more funds. And without new money, the pile of old debt would drag all of Apex down. Later, I learned that in a closed-door meeting, Donovan Croft had pointed directly at the map and said, "This parcel must be in our hands before the auditors dig any deeper." Lawyer Atherton asked, "What if Miss Vance doesn't sell, Mr. Chairman?" Donovan replied coldly, "If she won't sell, make her sign it over. If she won't sign it over, make it so she has no other choice." Hearing that sentence repeated in the case file gave me goosebumps. People say an inch of land is an inch of gold, but for the Croft family, my inch of land wasn't just gold. It was the life raft for their entire sinking ship, and I, naively, thought I was the beloved bride. In their plan, Julian was assigned to get closest to me. At first, he asked very naturally, "Where do you keep the deed to the old house?" "I'm asking so if we renovate later, we'll know where the paperwork is." I answered honestly, "Caleb has a copy. The original is in a small safe at home." He smiled again. "You're so careful." I even joked, if an accountant isn't careful, all she can do at the end of the month is hug her ledgers and cry. Once, he borrowed my social security card, saying the hotel needed the information to book our honeymoon suite. Another time, he held my phone, saying he needed a confirmation code to pay for plane tickets. I didn't suspect a thing. If I started suspecting my future husband over every OTP code, I'd probably blame myself for being petty. It's a sad truth. When a woman is in love, she's quick to scold herself before she dares to suspect others. Eleanor took a softer approach. She'd often ask me about my Aunt Carol and my mother's side of the family. "How is your Aunt Carol doing these days?" At the engagement party, she seemed very quiet. "Isaiah, her business isn't going so well, but she loves me very much, Eleanor. When I was little, she'd often come over to make me soup." Eleanor nodded. "Yes, you must cherish the family you have left. Blood is thicker than water, after all." At the time, I found her words comforting. Only later did I realize she wasn't saying it to remind me to cherish Aunt Carol, but to probe whether my aunt could be used as a pawn. At that time, Aunt Carol was $31,000 in debt. The initial loan was just to turn over inventory for her small dry goods stall at the market, but compound interest and a predatory loan disguised as a legitimate one from a shell company linked to Apex had trapped her. People came to her house, sat drinking tea, speaking politely, but every sentence was like a hand squeezing her throat. "You have a niece who's about to marry into the Croft family, don't you? If you cooperate, your debt will become much more manageable." Aunt Carol later recounted that she was shaking so much she dropped her teacup. She loved me. That was probably true. But when love can't overcome fear, even kinship can be put up for bargain. That's where the pain lies. And I, during those days, was still blithely preparing for my wedding. One afternoon, Julian drove me out to the riverbank to scout locations for a few more outdoor photos. The wind blew fiercely, the reeds bent low, and the river's surface was a silvery gray under the late-day sun. I pointed into the distance, my voice filled with pride. My dad used to have a piece of land near here. I used to fly kites there all the time as a kid. It's a big plot, but it's been untouched for years. Julian turned to look at me. Really? Why haven't you told me? I smiled. There's nothing to tell. It's just a memory. Caleb always says to keep it, never sell. He's very particular. Julian asked again, his voice as light as the wind. Is it in your name? My parents transferred it to me before. Caleb said what's mine should be clearly mine, to avoid complications later. Julian nodded, reaching out to smooth a lock of hair the wind had blown across my cheek. Caleb really loves you. I looked at him, my heart full of gratitude. I know. He's just too difficult. After we're married, can you help me put his mind at ease? Julian smiled, his eyes gentle. Of course. I'll do whatever it takes to make our family peaceful. I believed that sentence with all my heart. I had no idea that, in his mind at that moment, wasn't just me, not just the wedding, not just the home I had always longed for. There was a project map, a massive debt, a parcel of land by the river. And every word I had just spoken was being silently stored in his memory, like someone pocketing a key before opening another person's door. My wedding day arrived on a crisp, cold morning. Boston had sun that day, but it was a thin sun, like a tulle veil draped over the city's rooftops. From early morning, my parents' old house was bustling with people. My Aunt Carol stood in the yard, directing people carrying gift trays. Careful with that tray of sweets. If it tilts, it won't look good. Our side of the family may be small, but we can't be shabby. I sat in my room in a red dress, listening to the sounds of laughter and chatter outside, my heart fluttering. On the dressing table was a small framed photo of my parents. I looked at it for a long time, trying to hold back tears so I wouldn't smudge my makeup. Caleb stood at the doorway in a sharply pressed black suit. He looked different that day, more serious than usual, but there was something soft in his eyes. He handed me a box of tissues. Cry less. If you show up with swollen eyes, don't blame me for bad pictures. I laughed, tears still streaming. It's my wedding day, and you still can't say a single nice thing? He looked at the photo of our parents on the table, his voice low. If Mom and Dad were here today, they'd be so happy. Just that one sentence made my heart feel like it was being gently squeezed. I turned away, afraid I would sob out loud. Caleb came over and adjusted the train of my dress, his hands clumsy but careful. Alara. Yes? If anything feels wrong, you tell me immediately. I sighed. Here you go again. He fell silent. I didn't want to argue on my wedding day, so I just said softly, I want to be happy today. Can you let me be happy for one day? He looked at me for a long time and then nodded. But his eyes that day weren't like those of a brother sending his sister off to be married. They were the eyes of someone standing on a riverbank, watching the boat they cherished most drift into a whirlpool, unable to shout. The groom's party arrived on time, with trays of pastries, wine, tea, and fruit, all the traditional offerings. Julian stepped out of the car in a gray suit, holding the bridal bouquet. He looked at me through the crowd, his gaze so gentle it made me forget every warning. Alara, he called softly as he was led into the room to fetch the bride. You look beautiful today. I lowered my head, blushing so hard my face felt hot. Say it quieter, people can hear you. He smiled. I'm marrying my wife. Why should I be afraid to compliment her? His words made the nearby makeup artist chuckle. I smiled too. At that moment, I truly thought I had chosen the right person. The wedding reception was held at a large hotel near the city center. Chandeliers sparkled, white flowers covered the aisle, and soft music played like in a movie. The Croft family's relatives were numerous and elegant. Everyone was impeccably dressed, their conversations and laughter measured. My side was much smaller, just a few relatives, close friends, and colleagues. I felt a pang of sadness, but Eleanor quickly took my hand. Don't be sad that the bride's side is small. From now on, my home is your home too. She said this in front of all the guests. Then, on stage, she took the microphone, her voice choked with emotion. I don't have a daughter. Today, heaven has blessed me with a kind and gentle daughter-in-law. I promise before both families that I will love Alara as my own. After speaking, she removed the sapphire bracelet from her own wrist, held it up for everyone to see, and then fastened it onto mine again, like a ceremonial handover. Applause erupted, and many people in the audience wiped away tears. I was crying too. Julian, standing beside me, put his arm around my shoulders. He leaned down and whispered, "My wife, don't cry anymore. From now on, you have me." Hearing the words my wife made my heart melt. After so many years of living in a house without a mother's voice, so many nights forcing myself to be an adult so Caleb wouldn't worry, that day I thought I could finally lean on someone. Donovan Croft spoke last. He didn't speak for long, just raised his glass, his voice deep and clear. "From this day on, Alara Vance is a member of the Croft family. I expect you both to live honorably, uphold the family's reputation, and do nothing to cause trouble for either side." The hall applauded again. I bowed my head in thanks. At the time, his words just seemed strict, typical of a father-in-law in a traditional family. It was only much later that I understood. Some people say family not to protect, but to confirm ownership. Life really does love to play word games with the naive. Throughout the reception, Caleb sat at a table near the stage. He barely ate anything. Every time I looked down, he was observing the surroundings. At one point, his eyes met Donovan's. They said nothing, but the air between them grew visibly colder. I went down to offer a toast at his table. Caleb held up a glass of water. He wasn't drinking. "You're not happy, are you?" I asked quietly. He looked at me in my wedding dress, his voice softer than usual. "As long as you're happy, stop looking like you're about to be reprimanded. It's my wedding day." The corner of his mouth twitched into a slight smile. "All right, now that you're married, try to be less clumsy." I snorted. Such a touching blessing. He didn't smile further, just said, "Remember what I told you." I turned away, pretending not to hear. At that moment, I was afraid that if I heard one more warning, my happy day would crack. Late that night, I followed Julian to the Croft family's riverside villa. The iron gates opened slowly, and 2 rows of garden lights illuminated the pristine stone driveway. The villa looked breathtaking from the outside, like something out of a movie about the rich. But for some reason, as the car rolled through the gates, I felt a slight chill. The master suite was on the 3rd floor. Eleanor had had it decorated meticulously. White roses were scattered on the bed, scented candles were placed in the corners, and the velvet curtains were drawn. The bedding was brand new. Everything was so beautiful it felt untouched by human hands. Julian took off his tie and stumbled into the room. He had drunk quite a bit at the party. I helped him sit on the edge of the bed. "Go change and get some rest." "Why did you drink so much?" He smiled wearily and pulled my hand. "It was a happy day. Don't be mad, my wife." I sighed and took a towel to wipe his face. "I'm not mad, but you'll have to deal with the headache tomorrow." He lay down, his eyes closing almost immediately. Within minutes, his breathing was even. I sat beside him, feeling a mix of amusement and affection. My new husband, fast asleep on our wedding night. It sounded a bit pathetic, but at the time, I just thought he must be exhausted. I changed out of my heavy wedding gown, put on a white silk nightgown, and walked to the window. Outside, the wind from the river rustled through the trees, casting moving leaf shadows on the glass like slender hands. The villa was too large, too quiet. It was a quietness that didn't feel like peace, but like everything was holding its breath. I touched the sapphire bracelet. Suddenly, I missed my parents, missed the small kitchen, missed Caleb with his gruff, persistent warnings. When I turned back, I briefly saw a small camera in the corner of the hallway outside our door. A small red dot blinked once, then went out. I stood watching for a few seconds, telling myself it was probably just the security system switching to night mode. Rich houses have a lot of gadgets. A normal person like me would find anything strange. I blew out the candles and pulled the covers over myself, lying down next to Julian. The scent of white roses and candles blended together, making my head feel a little heavy. Before falling asleep, I thought, tomorrow I'll call Caleb and tell him I'm fine, that he doesn't need to worry anymore. I don't know how long I slept. Sometime in the middle of the night, I suddenly woke up. The room was dark, with only a faint blue light seeping through the curtains. Julian was still lying with his back to me, motionless. Then I felt someone standing next to the bed. My heart pounded so hard my ears started to ring. Before I could sit up, a rough hand clamped over my mouth. The person's breath was hot and ragged against my ear. "Don't turn on the light. If you want to live, come with me. Now." I froze, my whole body rigid. The hand over my mouth was incredibly strong, and the smell of sweat mixed with a cold, damp jacket filled my nose, making me nauseous. In my mind, there was only one thought. I'm being robbed. On my wedding night, in my in-laws' house, an intruder had snuck in and was standing right beside my bed. I struggled, my nails scratching the person's arm. He gripped me tighter, his voice low and urgent. Miss Vance, calm down. Don't scream. How could I be calm? I kicked my legs, trying to reach for the bedside lamp, but the person yanked me back. Fear rose to my throat, a cold dread spreading from the back of my neck down my spine. I thought of everything: robbery, kidnapping, assault. I even thought, maybe this is some twisted prank by the groomsmen. But no, the person's breathing was too tense, their grip too real. There was nothing playful about it. I made muffled sounds against his palm, tears of terror springing from my eyes. Just then, the man's voice grew hoarse, close to my ear. The Red Cardinal. I stopped, as if someone had thrown ice water on me. Not everyone knew those 3 words. When I was little, there was a cardinal that nested in the dogwood tree outside our old house. My mother loved it. Whenever Caleb came home late from his part-time job, he'd stand outside the gate, whistle a certain tune, and then softly call, "The Red Cardinal," so I'd know it was him. As we got older, it became our secret code. Whenever we needed to find each other in a crowd, he just had to say those 3 words. I stared wide-eyed in the dark. The man immediately let go of my mouth but kept his voice low. "Don't turn on the light. I'm one of Caleb's men. We have to go. Now." I was breathing heavily, shaking so much my teeth chattered. Who are you?" "My name is Howard. I'm the new driver for the family. There's no time. If you want to get out of this clean, we have to go. Now." I looked over at the bed. Julian was still lying there, as still as death, his breathing even, completely oblivious. The scene scrambled my thoughts. If this was Caleb's man, why would he do this? And if it was truly dangerous, how could Julian be sleeping so soundly? He stammered, No, I have to wake Julian." Howard shook his head, his eyes glinting fiercely in the darkness. "There's no one else. Trust me this one time, Miss Vance. A few more minutes, and it will be too late." I stood frozen. I had never been in such a surreal situation in my life. My wedding dress was still draped over a chair. My new husband was lying right in front of me, and a strange man was dragging me away in the middle of the night. Life really does have sharp turns, steeper than any mountain road, with no time to react. Howard bent down, picked up a gray windbreaker he had prepared, and draped it over my shoulders. "Put this on," quietly. I was practically pulled along by instinct. He opened the door just a crack. The hallway was dimly lit by wall sconces that cast a faint yellow light onto the long runner. The cold air from the vents blew across my ankles, making me shiver. Howard didn't lead me to the main staircase, but turned down a narrow passage at the end of the hall, behind what looked like a decorative wooden panel. "This house has a service staircase?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Big villas usually have a staff entrance." "Don't talk so much." The service stairs were narrow and steep. I was barefoot, so every step on the cold concrete was a shock. My mind was spinning. I wanted to stop, but I was afraid that stopping would lead to something even more terrible. The old saying goes, once bitten, twice shy. But I wasn't just bitten. I felt like I had been thrown straight into a den of wolves. When we reached the ground floor, the smell of leftover food from the kitchen still lingered in the air. The scent of roast chicken, grilled onions, and the grease from a day of feasting, not yet cleaned up. It all mixed together, creating a very strange sensation. The faint clatter of dishes from somewhere far away, then silence again. The whole vast villa seemed to be holding its breath. Howard gently pushed open the door leading to the back kitchen. There, under a dim light, a woman was waiting. She wore a dark brown sweater, her hair wrapped in a scarf, her hands clenched so tightly they were white. I looked closer and recognized her as the longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Tierney. She was always quiet, always keeping her head down as she moved about, so much so that I had barely noticed her. The moment she saw me, she rushed forward, her hands trembling as she zipped up my windbreaker. "Miss Alara, go, go." I looked at her bewildered. "What's happening? Where am I going? Why?" Her eyes were red, but she didn't answer directly. She just turned to unlatch the small iron gate leading to the side exit, her voice choked. "Go, Miss Alara, and don't look back." Her words made my heart clench. In that moment, I had a very bad feeling, but I still couldn't piece everything together. I grabbed Mrs. Tierney's hand. "What about Julian?" She bit her lip and turned away. Howard placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Get in the car." Outside the side gate was a dark alley, just wide enough for an old sedan parked close to the wall. The car's headlights were off, only the faint blue glow from the dashboard visible. I walked quickly, my feet freezing on the damp, cold concrete. As I climbed into the back seat, I realized I was still wearing a thin white nightgown under the jacket. My hair was a mess, and I had no shoes. I was shaking as if I had just been thrown into ice water. The car door shut with a thud. Howard got into the driver's seat and started the engine immediately. The car rolled quietly through the dark alley and turned onto the main road outside the villa complex. I looked back through the rear window. The Croft Villa was glowing with warm yellow lights against the night sky, with its layers of balconies, glass doors, and neatly trimmed trees. Just a few hours ago, I had walked in there as a new bride, thinking I had found a home. Now, watching it recede behind me, it looked more like a gilded cage that had just snapped shut, barely missing me. My voice was hoarse. "Howard, what is going on?" He didn't look at me in the rearview mirror. "Once we're somewhere safe, someone will explain everything to you." "Who?" He paused for a few seconds, then replied, "Caleb." The moment my brother's name was spoken, the sense of betrayal in me erupted. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. In my head, there was only one thought. Caleb did this. He couldn't stop me from getting married, so he ruined my wedding night. After driving for more than half an hour, the car stopped in front of an old apartment complex tucked between several dark buildings. The stairwell was narrow, the paint on the walls was peeling, and the hallway lights flickered. Howard led me to the third floor and stopped in front of a gray wooden door. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. The door opened. The person standing inside was Caleb. He was wearing a dark shirt, his face pale from lack of sleep, his eyes dark-rimmed, but his gaze was as taut as a drawn bow. The moment he saw me, he took a step forward. "Ilara," I didn't let him finish. All my panic, humiliation, anger, and shame coalesced into one point. I raised my hand and slapped him hard across the face. The sharp sound echoed in the quiet apartment, as dry and painful as a breaking ceramic bowl. I was trembling, crying and shouting at the same time. "Are you insane? Are you only happy when you've completely destroyed my marriage?" My hand stung and Caleb's face was turned to the side from the force. In the small apartment, no one spoke. Howard stood near the door. A woman I didn't recognize, who I would later know as Leanne, wasn't there yet. There was only the dry ticking of a wall clock. Caleb slowly touched his cheek, then looked at me. He wasn't angry, which only made me angrier. I backed away, pulling the jacket tighter around myself. "Tell me, what more do you want from me? You didn't like Julian, and I accepted it. You forbade me from marrying him, and I still listened. But to have someone drag me away from my own home on my wedding night like this, do you even see me as your sister anymore?" Caleb's voice was hoarse. "Ilara, you should change first. You're freezing." I burst out laughing through my tears. "You kidnap me from my husband's house and tell me to change my clothes? You really are good at staying calm." He bent down, picked up a paper bag from a chair, and handed it to me. Inside was a set of long-sleeved clothes, a face towel, slippers, and a new phone. "Your old phone is off. Put it in this bag. From now on, don't call anyone with your old number. Don't text Julian. Don't post anything online. And don't leave this apartment without someone with you." I looked at him as if he were a stranger. "Who do you think you are to give me orders? I'm the one trying to keep you alive and safe through the night." I choked. The sentence landed heavily, but the anger in me hadn't subsided. "I have to call my husband. Julian will panic when he wakes up and doesn't see me. Eleanor will worry too." Caleb cut me off, his voice low but firm. "Just watch." "Watch what?" He didn't answer immediately. He glanced at Howard. Howard gave a slight nod and placed a laptop on the table. The screen lit up, showing multiple camera feeds. The villa's gate, the first-floor living room, the hallway near the back kitchen. The images weren't crystal clear, but they were enough to recognize everyone. I stood frozen. By then it was nearly dawn, and the Croft Villa was in chaos. Julian burst out of the bedroom in a wrinkled shirt, his hair a mess, his face frantic. He ran down the hall banging on every door. "Ilara!" His voice, tinny through the laptop speakers, was still audible. I unconsciously stepped closer to the screen, my heart aching. That man was looking for me. He was genuinely panicked. At least, that's how it seemed to me then. Julian ran down the stairs and grabbed a housekeeper. "Have you seen my wife? Where's Ilara?" The housekeeper shook her head, her face pale. Julian yelled and slammed his hand into a vase by the stairs. It shattered. I flinched. Caleb, standing beside me, remained silent. Then Eleanor appeared. She was in a pale-colored nightgown, her hair down, her steps unsteady. The moment she heard I was missing, she clutched her chest and collapsed onto a sofa. People rushed to help her. When she came to, she grabbed the wedding photo from a table and sobbed. "Alara, my daughter, where are you? Why did you leave me?" I covered my mouth with my hand, tears streaming again. Her grief was so convincing that if I hadn't just been dragged out of that house myself, I would have believed she was the most heartbroken mother-in-law in the world. Julian knelt beside her, his head in his hands. "It's my fault. I drank too much. I couldn't protect Alara." Eleanor lightly slapped his shoulder, her voice choked. "Call her brother. Call Caleb now. She only listens to her brother." I whipped my head toward Caleb. "You see? They're so worried about me, and you still suspect them." Caleb looked at me, his face unchanged, but his eyes more tired. Real worry? Or a real performance? Keep watching. On the screen, Donovan Croft walked into the living room. He didn't shout, didn't run, didn't ask frantic questions. He adjusted his sleeves, looked around, and said to Mr. Atherton, who was standing nearby, "Have the media person check the house cameras. No need to report this widely yet." His voice was chillingly calm. I frowned. A father-in-law who just found out his daughter-in-law vanished on her wedding night. How could he be as calm as if he were dealing with a power outage? I immediately made an excuse in my head. Maybe Mr. Croft is used to handling big crises. The more chaos, the more he has to keep a straight face. When you don't want to believe something bad, you become an expert at finding justifications. A few minutes later, Caleb's phone rang. The screen showed Julian's name. Caleb put it on speaker. Julian's trembling voice filled the room. "Caleb, Alara's missing. I don't know where she went. She was in the room with me last night, and when I woke up, she was gone. Please help me find my wife. I'm begging you." I was shaking, wanting to snatch the phone and say I was here, that I didn't leave, that I didn't understand what was happening either. Caleb replied slowly, calmly. "Have you checked the house thoroughly?" "We have. We can't find her. My mom is a mess. My dad has people checking the cameras." "Has Alara contacted you?" Caleb looked at me and said, "No." Julian paused for a few seconds. Then his voice became quieter. "Can you come over? If you're here, my mom will feel better. And if Alara misunderstood something, you can help explain. I'm afraid the pressure of the wedding got to her and she did something rash." My heart grew a little colder. Rash? Why would it suddenly be rash? Caleb ended the call with a few distant phrases and immediately dialed another number. This time, his voice was completely different, concise, and professional. "Reporting, sir. The primary person of interest is my own sister. I'm requesting to be removed from a direct handling role to avoid a conflict of interest. I recommend an independent team take over the report of an unusual disappearance at the residence of Donovan Croft, Riverside District." I slumped into the chair. You really reported it to the police?" He looked at me. "If I don't report it, they'll write the story their way. The first person they'll turn into a villain could be me. The next will be you." I was speechless. Howard poured me a glass of warm water. I held it with both hands, but I was still shaking. Everything before me was spinning. Julian crying, Eleanor fainting, Donovan calm, Caleb reporting to his superiors. And me, the bride of less than a day, sitting in a strange apartment in someone else's clothes, about to watch my own in-laws turn me into a missing person. By midday, the feeds from the villa showed law enforcement had arrived. They entered the master suite, sealed off some items, checked the hallways, and took statements from everyone. Eleanor was still crying, but every time the camera panned away, she sat up a little straighter. Julian signed a written statement with his head down. Donovan stood by the window, constantly on the phone. My voice was almost gone. "Caleb, what would have happened last night if I hadn't left?" He didn't answer right away. He took a thin blanket and draped it over my shoulders. A clumsy gesture. "Just like when we were kids. You should rest." I looked at him, tears falling silently. "I can't sleep." He pulled a chair and sat across from me. This time, his voice was softer, but each word was still heavy as a stone. "Then listen carefully. From now on, don't be too quick to believe the tears of anyone in that house." I clutched the now cool glass of water. For the first time since being pulled from my wedding bed, I was no longer sure I should be angry at Caleb. But if I wasn't angry at him, I had to face a possibility that was far more painful. That the people who had just called me daughter and wife might have been preparing a play where the lead victim was me. Caleb didn't speak right away. He stood up, drew the curtains, and then went to the kitchen to make me a cup of ginger tea. The old apartment was so quiet that even the clink of the spoon against the cup sounded loud. I sat on the sofa, hugging my knees, my body still as cold as if I'd been soaked in ice water. When he placed the tea in front of me, I finally heard him speak, his voice deep and slow. Alara, what I'm about to tell you will be a shock. But it's better to be shocked than to be blind. I gave a weak, bitter laugh. What's left to shock me? He looked straight at me. There is. Just those two words sent a chill down my spine. He pulled a chair to sit opposite me. Howard stood near the door, silent as a shadow. Someone walked past in the hallway, the sound of their slippers shuffling and then fading away. Everything was so strangely normal, while my life had just been violently upended. Caleb opened his phone, displaying a simple floor plan of the villa's third floor. Last night, around 1:30 a.m., a man was supposed to sneak into your bedroom. I stared blankly for a few seconds, then shot up. What are you talking about? Hear me out. Hear what? Someone did come into my room. Howard! Caleb shook his head. The person who was planned to enter your room was not Howard. I stood there, frozen. His voice was steady, but each sentence was like a hammer blow to my head. The Croft family had prepared a scene to catch you cheating on your wedding night. A strange man would be brought into the room while you were asleep. Then, at the right moment, Julian, Eleanor, a few close relatives, the house staff, and even a videographer would burst in. I thought I had misheard. That's impossible. It's possible. Do you have any idea what you're saying? It was my wedding night. That's exactly why the trap was so vicious. I shook my head repeatedly, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. Why? Why would they do that? Caleb looked at me, his eyes a mix of pain and resolve. To destroy your reputation, to turn you into an adulterous bride on your wedding night, to have video, witnesses, and the story they wanted to tell. I collapsed onto the sofa, my body weak, my vision blurring. All I could see was the cup of ginger tea, steam rising thinly from it. Caleb continued. After catching you in the act, they would have made a huge scene. The video would be kept as evidence. You would have been forced to sign more documents, or cornered into accepting a reputation damage settlement as stipulated in the prenuptial agreement you signed. I looked up sharply. The contract. The clause in the final appendix. Exactly. If you commit an act of marital infidelity that causes severe damage to the honor and reputation of your husband's family, they can use that to demand compensation for damages. But that's just the excuse on paper. What they really wanted was to push you into a state of humiliation, panic, and helplessness, then force you to sign other documents. I bit my lip until it throbbed. They wanted to steal my assets. He didn't answer right away, but his silence was louder than words. I remembered the old house, the stock portfolio, the land by the river. I remembered Donovan Croft asking me so carefully about my job, my papers, my relatives during our first dinner. At the time, I thought he was just being a curious father-in-law. Now, every question replayed in my mind, each one with a hidden hook. My voice was a whisper, so, the man. It was Howard who spoke then, his voice raspy but firm. The hired man was intercepted by our team beforehand. We didn't let him get near you. I was sent in as a replacement, so if things went south, I could get you out immediately. I turned to look at him, my head spinning. You mean, this was all planned? Caleb answered, that family has been under surveillance for some time. We knew they were planning something dirty, but we couldn't blow the whole investigation. It wasn't until just before the wedding that we confirmed you were the primary target. A wave of anger choked me. Then why didn't you just tell me? Why did you let me marry him? Caleb closed his eyes for a brief second. Because I couldn't say anything at the time. And because if I had told you without proof, you wouldn't have believed me anyway. That last part cut right to the bone. I turned away. He was right. If a week ago, a month ago, or even last night he had told me the Crofts were setting a trap to frame me for adultery, I probably would have thought his job was making him paranoid. I let out a broken laugh. My life is a real comedy. Getting married felt like running an obstacle course. Howard sighed, while Caleb remained silent. I sat with my head in my hands for a long time as small details began to crawl out of my memory. The time Julian borrowed my phone for a confirmation code, claiming he was booking a honeymoon resort. The time he took a picture of my ID, saying it was for hotel procedures. The time Eleanor casually asked where I kept the property deeds. The time Mr. Atherton flipped through the last pages of the contract so quickly, And the camera in the hallway, its red light blinking before going dark. My voice trembled. Did Julian know about this? The room fell completely silent. I looked at Caleb, waiting for a denial. Just one sentence to say that Julian was tricked by his parents, that he didn't participate, that at least the man I loved wasn't vile enough to push me into humiliation. But Caleb said nothing. His silence was a tightening vice around my chest. It's true. Some answers don't need to be spoken to be understood. I bowed my head, my hands clenched so tight they turned white. He knew, didn't he? Caleb spoke slowly. Alara, in their plan, there was no scenario where Julian was completely innocent. I squeezed my eyes shut. A single tear fell onto the back of my hand, then another. I didn't sob. Perhaps at a certain point, the pain is so great that tears fall as silently as dust. I whispered, my voice breaking. I thought I'd found a decent man. Turns out I was just the prize they were after. Caleb looked at me, and this time, his voice was softer. You were wrong to trust. But trusting someone isn't a crime. The crime belongs to those who exploit that trust. I laughed bitterly. They say honey kills the fly. I must be the dumbest fly in Boston. Don't beat yourself up. How can I not? I argued with you. I thought you were trying to ruin my life. I let them lead me by the nose from start to finish. I paused, taking a sharp breath to suppress a sob. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Knowing your wedding night was nearly turned into such a humiliating trap? Because at that moment, I didn't know if I should collapse or stand up. I only knew one thing. From that second on, my marriage was no longer about love. It had become a struggle between my honor and an entire family's greed. Caleb sat in silence for another moment, then said, The adultery trap failed. They won't stop. I looked up, wiping my tears away forcefully. What do you mean? He enunciated each word clearly. If they can't make you an unfaithful bride, they'll switch tactics. They'll turn you into someone with psychological problems. That's still enough to tell a story that benefits them. Hearing that, I felt a chill creep from my hands up to my neck. It turned out the bucket of ice water hadn't finished pouring. There was a hailstorm waiting for me up ahead. I thought that after the shock of my wedding night, I had hit rock bottom. But no, the bottom for a betrayed woman isn't when she hears the truth. It's when, before the truth has even been digested, others have already constructed a new face for her and shoved it into the mouth of public opinion. That morning, I sat in the safe house, my head throbbing from lack of sleep. Caleb gave me a bowl of plain oatmeal, telling me to eat something warm. I held the spoon but couldn't swallow. The new phone on the table lit up constantly with messages from colleagues and friends, but I didn't dare open them. I was afraid that once I looked at my old life, it would shatter into a million pieces. Around mid-morning, Howard brought in some printouts and a tablet. His face, already serious, was even heavier. They've started. I looked at him, confused. Caleb took the tablet, swiped a few times, and handed it to me. Read this. I took a deep breath and looked at the screen. The front page of a tabloid news site had a headline that hit me like a slap. Bride vanishes on wedding night. Reportedly showed signs of prior mental instability. Below was my wedding photo with Julian, cropped from the hotel's social media page. I read on, my hands growing cold. The article quoted an anonymous source who said that before the wedding, I often showed excessive anxiety, insomnia, and was easily startled. One part even said I felt I was being followed and had multiple baseless suspicions. The wording was clever, never stating anything directly but leading the reader to one conclusion. This bride is not normal. I shot up. What is this? Caleb pulled a few photocopied sheets from a folder. Look at this. I took them. It was a health examination form with my name, my social security number, and the stamp of a private clinic. In the doctor's notes section, the conclusion stated I showed signs of an anxiety disorder, prone to panic, with a tendency toward paranoid delusions under emotional distress. I was so stunned I couldn't breathe. This is impossible. I've never been to a psychologist. Caleb looked at me. Think back. I searched my memory, and then it was as if a curtain was violently ripped open. An afternoon a few weeks ago came into focus. That day, Eleanor had called me over for dinner and said she would take me for a premarital health checkup on the way. She had even laughed. A girl should get checked before getting married, just for peace of mind. It's a hassle to do it after the wedding. I went along without a second thought. At the clinic, they took my blood pressure and drew blood. Then a middle-aged doctor asked a few casual questions. Do you have trouble sleeping? Feeling stressed lately? Have you ever felt pressure from work or family matters? I had given a few vague answers, thinking it was just a standard part of the procedure. I never imagined that from those few casual words, they would manufacture an entire fake psychological profile. I squeezed the paper, my throat tight and burning. She planned this from the start. Caleb replied slowly. Before the wedding, I collapsed into the chair, my mind spinning. The Croft family hadn't just set a trap for the wedding night, they had prepared an escape route. If they couldn't frame me for adultery, they would tell the world the bride ran away due to mental instability. It was a perfect story. It preserved the image of a kind-hearted groom's family while turning me into a problem case. I was still reeling when Howard said, "That's not all." He played another video. This time, it was a short live stream clip cut from a social media account. The person on screen was my Aunt Carol. I froze. She was wearing a purple floral blouse, sitting in her familiar stall at the market, her eyes red and her voice trembling. My niece, Alara, has been sensitive since she was little. Ever since her parents passed, she hasn't been as stable as other people. Caleb loves his sister, but he's too strict, controls her too much. Maybe the pressure of the wedding made her do something rash and run away. I couldn't listen anymore. I slammed the screen off, my hand shaking violently. No, that's impossible. My voice broke as if torn. Aunt Carol would never lie about me. Aunt Carol was my mother's younger sister. When my parents died, she was the one who brought me soup, slipped a few dollars into my hand for milk, and cried with me in the corner of the kitchen. On the days before Christmas, she would sneak over half a pound of ham and a few small fruitcakes, saying, "This is what we have, don't look down on it." I had always believed that no matter where life took me, she would be my family. Yet here she was, telling the world her niece had psychological problems. I covered my face, hot tears streaming down. It wasn't sobbing. It was the kind of tears that are so painful they feel humiliating even as they fall. What did I do to make everyone treat me like this? Caleb sat down next to me, his voice low. Carol is being coerced. I looked up, my tears blurring his glasses. Coerced how? She's $31,000 in debt. The loan sharks are connected to a shell company of Apex Developments. They've visited her a few times. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. So being coerced gives her the right to push me under the bus? Caleb didn't answer, because he knew there was no answer that would make me hurt less. That whole afternoon, a flood of similar articles appeared online. Some said I was emotionally weak. Others hinted that I was haunted by a lack of affection from a young age. Some even pitied the kind Croft family for ending up with such a mentally ill bride. Reading them, I felt my body go cold. I remembered Eleanor's eyes every time she held my hand, remembered her saying, "I'll love you, like my own daughter." And then I looked at the fake psychological profile in front of me and laughed until my throat burned. It's true. Some people can show their true colors in a heartbeat. Late in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. A woman in her early 30s with her hair tied back, wearing a beige blouse, walked in. She looked at me for a moment, then placed a briefcase on the table. "Hello, Alara. I'm Leanne Palmer, an old friend of Caleb's." I glanced at my brother. He nodded. "Leanne works in crisis communications. She's here to help you." Leanne pulled up a chair, her voice calm. "Cry if you need to. It's okay. But after you cry, you need to wipe your face and save the evidence. They're trying to tell your story for you. If you stay completely silent, the world will believe whoever talks more." I looked up, still choked with emotion. What can I say now? I've lost my husband, my mother-in-law, and now my own aunt has turned against me. Leanne looked me straight in the eye. "You haven't lost everything. You still have the truth. The question is, are you calm enough to walk with it?" Her words silenced me. Outside the window, the late-year Boston sky began to darken. On the street below, the sound of a distant siren mixed with the traffic. Life went on as normal, as if no one had just been dragged from their wedding night, framed by their in-laws and relatives with a mask of insanity, and hung up online. I clutched the cool glass of water, the feeling of pain gradually mixing with something else not quite strength, but like a smoldering ember in a pile of ash. Maybe people only truly wake up when they have nothing left to be naive about. That evening, Eleanor went live. Leanne was the one who set up the device for me to watch, but before she pressed play, she looked at me carefully. "Are you sure you want to see this?" I sat on the sofa, my hands on my knees. I had barely eaten all day. The oatmeal was cold, the tea was cold, and people's hearts were cold. I just nodded. "I have to know what they're saying about me." Leanne didn't stop me. The screen showed the living room of the Croft villa, the same place where I had eaten chowder, where I'd heard Eleanor call me her daughter. Now, in the middle of the room, was a wheelchair. Eleanor sat in it, her hair disheveled, her face without makeup. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she was clutching the framed wedding photo of Julian and me. Just looking at it, anyone who didn't know the story would have their heart soften. She raised a handkerchief to her eyes, her voice breaking. I don't know where my Alara is. I just hope she can hear her mother's words. Alara, if you're watching, please come home. I don't blame you, my dear. A chill ran down my spine. The words "I don't blame you" sounded like an embrace, but they were actually a noose. She didn't have to say I was wrong. She just had to say she didn't blame me, and the public would assume I was at fault. So clever. Tears, if shed at the right camera angle, are sharper than any knife. She really knew how to use her tear ducts for PR. Julian sat beside her, wearing a wrinkled shirt, his face stubbled and red-eyed. He looked so worn down that my heart still ached, and I hated myself for it. He bowed his head, his voice hoarse. Alara, I know you were under a lot of pressure. I know I wasn't good enough, but please, don't hide anymore. Come back. Whatever happened, we can talk about it behind closed doors. I don't blame you, and Mom doesn't blame you. I let out a dry, harsh laugh. Leanne looked at me. Do you hear it now? I nodded, my throat tight. They're not saying I left with someone, not saying I did anything wrong, but every word makes people think I'm the one at fault. Caleb stood by the window, his arms crossed. He didn't look at the screen for long, but his jaw was clenched. The comments on the live stream were flying. Poor in-laws, married a mentally unstable bride. Her brother's in law enforcement, he probably took her. A mother-in-law like this, and she still complains? Unbelievable. That Alara girl should speak up, stop making her family suffer. I read a few lines and my hands started to shake. Strangers who had never met me, who had no idea how I was dragged from that room, were passing judgment as if they lived under my bed. The court of public opinion truly needs no evidence, just a Wi-Fi connection. Eleanor continued to cry. I took pity on the girl because she was an orphan. I thought in this house, she would feel less alone, but I don't understand why her brother kept trying to stop the marriage. I just want to ask Caleb, if you are keeping your sister, please let her come home. Don't let your prejudice against my family tear a husband and wife apart. I turned to Caleb. His face was still cold, but his eyes had darkened. He raised a hand, signaling me not to speak. On the screen, Julian suddenly stood up and clasped his hands in front of the camera. Caleb, I'm begging you. I don't know what misunderstanding there is between you and my family, but Alara is my wife. I just want to see her once to know she's safe. He bowed his head very low. A wealthy man, a vice president, bowing before the camera to beg his brother-in-law. It was a beautiful performance. So beautiful it was nauseating. Less than an hour later, Caleb's new phone rang nonstop. There were unknown numbers, colleagues, even superiors. He answered one call, replying only briefly, "Yes, I will be there to give a statement. I understand." I reported the conflict of interest from the beginning. I jumped up. A statement? What for? He hung up and looked at me. I've been asked to take a temporary leave of absence pending an investigation into the complaint. My ears started ringing. Because of me. Because they're trying to frame you as someone who abused his position to take me away. I took a step back, my chest aching. I'm so sorry. Caleb frowned. Don't be sorry. You're not the one who did anything wrong. But if I had listened to you from the start. Alara, he called my name very softly, but it was enough to silence me. Don't punish yourself for someone else's crime. That doesn't help you win. It just makes them stronger. I burst into tears, not out of weakness, but out of rage. The person who raised me, who protected me my whole life, was now being dragged through the mud just for trying to save me. I was angry at the Crofts, but I was 10 times angrier at myself. If only I had trusted less, craved a mother's love less. Maybe my brother wouldn't have been pushed into this corner. Leanne turned off the live stream. The room fell silent. She looked at me, her voice clear. From now on, you cannot react based on your pain. They want you to break down, call Julian, or post something reckless. The moment you do, they'll use it as proof that you're unstable. I wiped my tears. So what do I do? First, you learn to tell the truth. I gave a bitter smile. I have to learn to tell the truth? Yes, because if you say it the wrong way, even the truth can be twisted. You need to be able to answer 3 questions. Why did you leave the villa? Why didn't you contact your husband? And what proof do you have that you were set up? I fell silent. Leanne held her phone up to me, in selfie camera mode. Now, try. Look in here and say, I am Alara Vance. I looked at the lens, my throat closing up. Just one sentence and I couldn't say it. My mind flashed with images of Eleanor clutching the wedding photo, Julian bowing his head, my aunt saying I was unstable, Caleb being suspended. Everything crashed down on me like a flood. I opened my mouth. I am. And tears streamed out. I doubled over, sobbing uncontrollably. Leanne didn't comfort me. Caleb didn't either. They let me cry. It was the first time I realized that not being forced to stop crying is its own kind of kindness. A long time later, Leanne handed me a tissue. Are you done? I sniffled. Not really, but crying more probably won't get them to jail any faster. Leanne's lips quirked. Keep that sentence. Your voice is starting to have some force. I let out a very small laugh, though my eyes were still red. It was the first laugh since my twisted, exhausting wedding night, but at least it was mine. I sat up straight and looked into the camera lens again. My name is Alara Vance. I did not run away because of mental instability. I left my husband's home on my wedding night because I was warned that I was in danger. My voice shook, but this time, it didn't break. Caleb, by the window, turned his face away. I knew he didn't want me to see the redness in his eyes. Leanne stopped the recording. Good, we can't use it yet, but it's good. I looked at myself on the phone screen. My face was pale, my hair hastily tied back, my eyes swollen. I no longer looked like the bride in the wedding photo, but I also didn't look entirely like someone driven to a dead end. Outside, the Croft family was using tears to pull the world to their side. And I, in that old apartment, was starting to learn how to say one sentence without trembling, then another, and another. I used to think that all I needed was to be loved. But that night, I learned a bitter lesson. When people use love to push you off a cliff, the thing that saves you isn't tears, it's evidence, and a clear head. The next morning, I woke up with my head feeling like it was filled with rocks. The night before, I had practiced speaking until my voice was raw. Sometimes I could get out 2 sentences. Other times, just mentioning the word mother would make my throat tighten. But maybe Leanne was right. You can't just sit and cry and wait for the truth to walk out and present itself to the world. Caleb placed a folder in front of me, the papers neatly organized in a clear plastic sleeve. Read this. I took it, my palms growing cold as I read the title on the first page. It was a scanned copy of the prenuptial agreement I had signed at the Croft Villa. Every page, every word, every one of my signatures was clearly visible. The only difference was that this time, I wasn't reading it through the eyes of a hopeful bride-to-be. I turned the pages slowly. The first part was just as Mr. Atherton had said. It confirmed my separate property, Julian's separate property, and the principle of independent management. It all sounded very proper, even beneficial to me. I laughed dryly. The paperwork was so cleverly written. Anyone skimming it would think it was decent. Caleb sat across from me, his arms crossed. Flip to the final appendix. I did as he said. The font on the last few pages was much smaller, the sentences long and convoluted. I read each line carefully, and my heart sank when I reached that one clause. Should one party engage in marital infidelity, causing severe damage to the honor, reputation, and commercial interests of the other party, the aggrieved party has the right to demand compensation for actual damages and to request cooperation in the disposition of related assets to rectify the consequences. I gripped the edge of the paper. Cooperation in the disposition of assets. The wording was so vague, Caleb nodded. It doesn't explicitly say they'll take your assets, but with a fake adultery video, witnesses, public pressure, and a few more coerced signatures on a power of attorney or a new commitment, this clause becomes their legal justification. I looked at my signature at the bottom of the appendix and felt as if I'd been slapped. Why didn't I demand to take it home to read? Leanne, sitting beside me, said gently, because you were being emotionally manipulated. They didn't trick you with the words first. They tricked you with affection. Her words brought back that afternoon at the villa. Eleanor holding my hand, mentioning my late mother, saying, if your mother were alive, she would want you to be protected. And Mr. Atherton, breezing through the final pages with a smile, saying, just some general principles, Alara. At the time, I even felt lucky to have met such an honorable family. Looking back now, it's true what they say. You don't know who's who until the house is on fire. The only problem was, my house hadn't even caught fire, and the rats had already chewed through the foundation. I put the papers down and took a deep breath. It's not just this contract. Caleb looked at me. What do you remember? I closed my eyes for a moment, organizing the jumbled pieces of memory. Before the wedding, Julian borrowed my phone many times. Once, he said he was booking a car to see a restaurant. Another time, he said he was paying for honeymoon tickets. Another time, he asked for a confirmation code to log into an account because the reservation email was sent to my phone. Leanne immediately asked, "Did you give it to him?" "Yes. I read the codes to him directly." Caleb let out a very faint sigh but didn't blame me. He just asked, "What else?" He took photos of my ID several times, saying he needed it for hotel procedures, wedding paperwork, registering for some service. I didn't pay much attention. Email. I flinched. Yes. Once, he held my phone for a while and asked for my email password, saying he needed to check a confirmation from a resort. I even teased him for being so clumsy. As I said it, a chill ran down my spine. One small thing, then another. Each one was harmless on its own, but together, they formed a hand that was slowly reaching into all my documents and accounts. Caleb opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. "Try logging into your backup email." I did. The inbox appeared, filled with hundreds of old messages. Caleb told me to look for login security alerts. I scrolled down a bit and found several emails reporting logins from unfamiliar devices on evenings leading up to the wedding. I had been too busy then to notice. Then, a draft email appeared in my saved folder. I clicked on it, my hand shaking. It was an incomplete application to a bank, with attached scans of my stock certificates, information on the Riverside property, and a proposal for asset verification. The recipient was an internal email address at a bank branch. I opened my mouth but couldn't speak. Caleb said slowly, "They were preparing a parallel track to seize your assets alongside the adultery trap. If you were pushed into a weak position, they would both force you to sign and use the copied documents and your signature sample to push the paperwork through." "Which bank?" "The branch where Brian Keller is in charge." I frowned. I had never heard the name, but from Caleb's expression, I knew the man was shady. "Who is he?" "A vice president of the branch, close with Donovan Croft. The kind of person whose eyes light up brighter than stage lights at the sight of money." I bit my lip, my heart racing. But this time it wasn't panic. It felt like a simmering rage that was finally finding a direction. So what do I do? Caleb pulled a few drafted documents from his briefcase. "First, we block all the holes. You sign these dispute notices and requests to temporarily freeze all transactions related to assets in your name. Send them to the bank, the land registry office, notary offices, and the brokerage firm. Do it by the book, with legal grounds and a confirmed signature, and they will be forced to review everything." I took each paper. The legal jargon was as dense as before, but this time I read it with clarity. Not because I had become smarter overnight, but because I had been hurt enough to understand that every word could either save me or kill me. Leanne looked at me and smiled faintly. "See? Your accounting skills are coming in handy." I let out a half-sad, half-bitter breath. First time I've ever found being meticulous so useful. That entire afternoon, I sat with Caleb, reviewing every piece of information. The parcel number, the map number, the brokerage account number, the address of the old house, the stock information, and all the dates I suspected my accounts were illicitly accessed. If I was unsure about something, I racked my brain until my head throbbed. But strangely, the more I worked, the clearer my mind became. By the end of the afternoon, the notices had been sent out through the proper channels. I signed the last document, my palms damp with sweat. After signing, I looked up at Caleb. "Is that it?" He shook his head. "No. This is the beginning." I gave a tired laugh. That sounded just like him. About an hour later, Caleb's phone rang. He answered, speaking only a few short sentences. After hanging up, he looked at me. "The bank has frozen the processing of any files related to your assets." I was stunned. "Really?" "Yes. They're demanding a full review due to the dispute notice." I sat in silence for a few seconds. For the first time in days, I felt a small bit of relief in my chest. Not complete relief, but the feeling that I had just managed to pull shut a door that someone else was about to swing wide open. Howard walked in from outside with more news. "There's chaos at the Croft house." Julian heard the bank froze the files and smashed his phone right in front of Eleanor. I looked at him, imagining Julian's calm face twisted in anger, and felt a profound bitterness. The man who had gently promised to do anything to keep our family peaceful. It turned out that when his plan to seize assets was blocked, the first thing to break wasn't his conscience, but his phone. After the bank froze the files, I thought I could breathe for a moment. But before I could take a deep breath, Caleb placed a photo in front of me, a still from the back kitchen's security camera. In the photo, a woman in a dark brown sweater was unlatching the side gate. Her face was slightly lowered, showing only one side of her cheek and her thin hands gripping the iron bar. I recognized her immediately. Mrs. Tierney. Caleb nodded. The one who opened the gate for you that night. I stared at the photo for a long time. On my wedding night, everything was so chaotic that I only remembered her trembling hands and her choked words. Go, Miss Alara. Don't look back. At the time, I didn't understand why a housekeeper would do something so dangerous. Is she still at the Croft house? Caleb shook his head. No. The very next morning, Eleanor accused her of stealing a gold ring. She was fired from the villa. A chill went through me. She suspected Mrs. Tierney helped me. She definitely suspected. But without proof, she used the theft accusation to silence her. I bit my lip. Someone had risked everything to open a door for me, and I was only now asking about her. Guilt wrapped around my throat. I want to see her. Caleb looked at me. She's terrified. If we go with law enforcement, she might run. Then let me go. I'll talk to her, woman to woman. He was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. This time, he didn't forbid it. Perhaps he also understood that I couldn't always be the little sister sheltered behind his back. That afternoon, Leanne and I took a regular car to a low-income housing area near a wholesale market. Howard followed at a distance, not joining us. The Boston sky was gray, and wind snaked through the rows of low-slung apartment buildings, carrying the smell of dried fish, wilted vegetables, and charcoal smoke from cheap diners. Life here was cramped and noisy, but it was more real than the cold, glamorous facade of the Croft Villa. Mrs. Tierney's apartment was at the end of the row. The old wooden door had a few faded children's clothes hanging outside. I knocked gently. After a moment, the sound of shuffling slippers, and the door opened a crack. When Mrs. Tierney saw me, her face went pale, and she tried to shut the door immediately. I quickly put my hand out to stop it. Mrs. Tierney, it's me, Alara. I just want to talk. She looked past me, her eyes full of panic. Go away. I don't know anything. I know you're scared. I didn't bring the police. I just came to thank you and ask you one thing. Mrs. Tierney gave a twisted smile. No need to thank me. You got out, that's your luck. Don't drag me into it. I have 2 kids. I looked into her bloodshot eyes. They weren't the eyes of someone indifferent. They were the eyes of someone who had been afraid for too long, so afraid that even kindness had to be hidden under the bed. I spoke softly. You opened the door for me. You saved me. She turned her face away. I didn't save anyone. The gate was broken. It opened on its own. Leanne stood beside me, saying nothing. I took a deep breath and stepped back a little to give her space. Mrs. Tierney, I'm not going to force you to testify right now, but I want you to know, they're telling people I'm crazy, that I ran away because I'm unstable. They even used fake documents to try and take my property. Her hand on the door froze. I looked at her, my voice more choked than I expected. You lost your husband because of them. I almost lost my whole life because of them. If we stay silent, someone else will be the next bait. That sentence made her expression change. She stood silently for a long time, then opened the door wider. Come in. The apartment was barely 100 square feet. An iron bed, a small electric stove, a corner with some bags of rice and boxes of instant noodles. On the wall hung a faded family photo. The man in the picture was thin, with a kind smile, standing next to Mrs. Tierney and 2 small children. Seeing me look at the photo, she said quietly, That's my husband, Bill. He used to be a subcontractor for Apex. I sat down on a plastic stool, not daring to press her. Mrs. Tierney poured some water, her hand shaking so much it sloshed over the side. Back then, he took a job doing foundation work for one of their projects. After it was done, they made him sign a new cost overrun document. Said it was just procedure. Turns out, it turned into a massive materials debt under his name. When he refused to pay, they harassed him, threatened him, and sent people to our house. We lost the house. He was so devastated he got sick. He died without being able to rest in peace. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. Some pain, when held for too long, can no longer be cried out. It just falls out in dry, hard words. I asked, So why did you go work at the villa? She gave a sad smile. At first, I wanted to find evidence, to know who ruined my husband. But once I was inside, I saw how deep it all went. I was just a dishwasher, a cleaner. I'd hear a few things, but I had to pretend to be deaf. I was so scared, Miss Alara. If it was just me, it would be one thing. But my kids are still small. I said softly, I understand. Her eyes reddened. No, you don't understand everything. The night you got married, I heard Eleanor talking to that lawyer, Atherton, in the tea room. She said, as long as Alara believes I'm her mother, getting her to sign anything is easy. I heard that and my blood ran cold. My heart felt like it was being crushed. Mrs. Tierney stood up and walked to the kitchen corner. She opened a blue plastic rice container, reached her hand deep beneath the rice, and pulled out a small, tightly wrapped plastic bag. Inside was a black USB drive. I've been hiding this for a long time. I thought one day I could give it to someone who could use it. But after you escaped, Eleanor suspected me. She accused me of stealing a ring, fired me, and had someone send a message. If I talk, my 2 kids won't be safe. I looked at the USB drive in her hand. It was so small it fit in her palm, yet it made the whole room feel heavy. What's on it? Recordings. Eleanor talking to Mr. Atherton. There's a part where they discuss the reputation damage clause. A part where she says they have to humiliate you on your wedding night so you won't dare hold your head up. I even managed to record a bit of Donovan talking about the Riverside property, but it's not very clear. I reached out to take it. My fingers touched the cool plastic bag and my heart ached again, remembering how Eleanor had fastened the bracelet on my wrist, how she had spoon-fed me dessert, how she had said, I'll be a mother to you. I let out a very soft laugh as tears streamed down my face. You know, I actually believed she genuinely cared for me. Mrs. Tierney looked at me, her voice hoarse. Anyone who's lost a mother is an easy target for someone who calls them daughter. It's not your fault for wanting to be loved. That sentence broke me. I buried my face in my hands and cried silently. Not out of weakness, but because for the first time, someone else saw my exact wound without using it against me. Leanne took out her phone but just placed it on the table. Mrs. Tierney, if you agree to hand over this evidence, we will pass it to the proper authorities. But you will have to give a full statement, no additions, no omissions. And you have the right to request protection for your children. Mrs. Tierney looked at Leanne immediately. Will my kids be safe? I looked up, wiping my tears. I can't make empty promises, but I will ask Caleb to follow the proper procedures. You saved me once. This time, I won't let you stand alone. Mrs. Tierney bit her lip, her hands twisting together. Then, she nodded very slowly. I'll testify, but if anything happens to my children, I took her hand. No one is allowed to use your children to silence you ever again. She burst into tears, a small, choked sound that had been suppressed in her chest for years. Leaving the apartment complex, I held the USB drive in my jacket pocket, my hand covering it the entire way back. On the street, people were still haggling over vegetables, calling out to each other on the sidewalk. Life was so normal that our pain seemed like a private matter no one knew about. But I knew that from that tiny USB drive, Eleanor Croft's mask of the benevolent mother-in-law had just begun to crack. The USB from Mrs. Tierney was handed over that same night. Caleb didn't keep it in the apartment for long. He said that the more important the evidence, the more you couldn't give anyone an excuse to say you fabricated it. Everything had to go through the right people, the right procedures, with receipts, copies, and seals. It sounded as dry as a forgotten cracker, but after everything that had happened, I was starting to understand. If we made one wrong move, the Croft family would have an excuse to twist the other 100 steps we took. The next morning, as I was halfway through a bowl of chicken noodle soup Leanne had brought, her phone started vibrating nonstop. She glanced at the screen, her expression changing instantly. Lara, stay calm. I put down my chopsticks. What now? Leanne turned the phone towards me. A video was going viral. The title hit me like a slap. Missing bride spotted entering hotel with strange man. I felt my hands go cold. In the clip, a woman in a gray jacket with her hair tied back walked beside a tall man. The man's face was blurred. They walked through a lobby with glass doors, a reception desk, and a brightly lit hallway visible behind them. The angle was shaky, as if from a security camera. The woman was me. I felt the blood drain from my body. No, this was the day I was brought to the safe house. Leanne nodded. I know that, but the people watching don't. The comments under the clip were multiplying by the second. Someone sneered that I was playing the victim role too well. Someone else said Julian was a pitiful man, betrayed on his wedding night. Another even dragged Caleb into it, saying he was covering for his sister. I read a few lines and had to put the phone face down on the table. My throat tightened, and the soup in front of me suddenly smelled so foul I couldn't swallow. I shot up and paced the room. They're this despicable? Mrs. Tierney just gave us the USB, and they're already releasing this. Caleb, who had just finished a call by the door, looked tense. They might have known you met with her, or they guessed we were about to get evidence, so they struck first. My voice trembled. What do I do? Just sit here again? Leanne looked at me. No. This time. You watch the clip carefully. I turned back, almost unable to believe my ears. Watch what? It's obviously doctored. If you want to say it's doctored, you have to point out how. Emotion doesn't beat a data file, Alara. I took a deep breath and sat down. Leanne played the clip on a larger screen, slowing down the speed. I watched every frame. At first, my vision was blurred with anger, but the more I watched, the more I noticed something was off. Stop. Right there. Leanne paused it. I pointed to the left side of the frame, where a blue sign was hanging on the wall. That's not a hotel policy sign. Caleb came closer. Are you sure? I looked closer. The text on the sign was blurry, but I could still make out a few words. Residents, please, and do not park at entrance. I said quickly, hotels don't say residents. This is a notice for an apartment building. It's the lobby of the safe house where I was brought. Leanne immediately took a screenshot. Excellent. What else? I replayed the part where I walked past the glass door. Suddenly, my eyes locked on my own wrist. A small brown fabric bracelet appeared for a split second. I held up my wrist. I was still wearing it. You gave this to me after I left the villa. Leanne nodded. Right. The next morning, I told you to wear it because the sapphire bracelet was too recognizable. I felt my heart pound. But the post says this clip was filmed before I went missing. If it was before, I wouldn't have been wearing this. Caleb looked at me, and for the first time in days, his eyes lit up a little. Do you remember the exact moment Leanne gave you the bracelet? I remember. It was when you were making me practice speaking in front of the camera. I was crying so hard my hands were cold. She took it off her own wrist and gave it to me, said to hold on to something so I wouldn't shake. Leanne smiled faintly. Well, I'll be. My $2 bracelet from a street fair finally gets to be a star witness. Life really knows how to be resourceful. I let out a tiny laugh, and my eyes immediately welled up. Not from happiness, but because for the first time, I felt I wasn't completely powerless. That same afternoon, the clip was sent to a digital forensics expert Leanne knew, and the original file was submitted to the authorities. The initial findings showed that the audio had been dubbed over, and the timestamp on the video didn't match the original camera's metadata. Several seconds had been cut right before I entered the elevator. The man next to me was part of the protection detail but had been blurred to create a sense of mystery. That evening, Leanne said, "Press conference tomorrow." I froze. I have to appear in public? Yes. No crying, no long-winded stories. Just state what you know for sure and have evidence for. Don't touch on the ongoing investigation. Don't release all your documents. We tell the truth, but we don't jeopardize the case. I looked at Caleb. Are you going to be there? He nodded. Yes, but only as your brother, and as the person who reported the incident to my superiors. I won't speak for you. His words made me silent for a long time. I used to be angry at him for making decisions for me. Now he was standing there but letting me speak for myself. I felt both scared and grateful. The press conference was held in a small, unadorned conference room. I wore a white shirt, black pants, and my hair was tied back. Leanne had told me not to wear too much makeup. You don't need to be beautiful. You need to be clear. As I walked in, dozens of camera lenses turned towards me. The flashes blinded me. For a moment, I wanted to turn and run. I heard whispers somewhere. There's the missing bride. She looks normal. Who knows what's real? I sat down, placing my hands on the table to keep them from shaking. Leanne gave a brief introduction and then turned the floor over to me. I looked at the row of cameras in front of me, took a breath, and began. My name is Alara Vance. My voice trembled slightly, but didn't break. I was wrong to love blindly. I was wrong to sign a document without reading it carefully. But my mistakes do not give anyone the right to steal my property, slander my name, and turn me into a tool for a crime. The room went quiet. I presented my case, piece by piece. I said I left the villa on my wedding night because I was warned I was in danger. I said the prenuptial agreement contained unfavorable clauses that were not explained properly. I said the psychological profile being circulated showed signs of being fabricated. I said the hotel video was, in fact, doctored from footage at an apartment building with a resident notice board and had an incorrect timeline. Leanne then displayed the contract with sensitive information redacted, the initial forensic report on the video, the notice of frozen assets, and a confirmation that other evidence had been submitted to the authorities. No classified investigative material was released. A reporter asked, "Are you claiming your husband participated in this conspiracy?" I gripped my hands under the table. I will not draw conclusions for the authorities, but I have the right to say that what happened cannot be dismissed as a simple family misunderstanding. Another asked, "Do you resent your mother-in-law?" I looked straight at the camera. The person I once called mother used that very word to make me trust her. I won't express my resentment in words. I will let the evidence speak. After the press conference, I walked out into the hallway and my legs almost gave out. Caleb was waiting at the end of the corridor. He didn't hug me, just handed me a bottle of water. "Okay?" I took it and gave a tired smile. I didn't faint, so I guess I'm okay. He looked at me, the corners of his eyes red, but his mouth was still firm. "You spoke well this time." I lowered my head. For the first time, his dry praise felt strangely warm. That night, public opinion began to shift. People shared photos of the apartment building's notice, analyzed the bracelet, talked about the contract and the asset freeze. The same people who were throwing stones at me yesterday were now hastily writing that we needed to wait for the truth. Public opinion does a complete 180 faster than you can blink. But I didn't feel much joy. I just sat by the window of the safe house, looking at my reflection in the glass. I knew the mask of the Croft family had just cracked a little more. And when a mask cracks, the person wearing it will certainly not sit still and watch it fall. After the press conference, I didn't return to the same safe house. Leanne said the location had drawn too much attention. Even though no one had publicly revealed the address, the Croft family had money, connections, and a habit of reaching into places ordinary people wouldn't expect. So, the support team decided to move me to another secure location. I sat in a small waiting room behind the conference center, still clutching the water bottle Caleb had given me. My throat was dry, and my head felt as heavy as if I were balancing the ceiling on it. Online, public opinion was shifting. Eleanor was turning from a pitiable mother-in-law into a suspected manipulator. Julian, from a heartbroken groom to a person of interest. But the more that happened, the more uneasy I felt. Leanne sat beside me, scrolling through her phone. "They're too quiet." I looked at her. "Quiet is scary too?" For normal people, quiet means they're thinking. For people like Donovan Croft, quiet usually means they're planning a different move. Caleb, standing near the door, heard this but said nothing. He just glanced at his watch and then turned to me. "The car will be here in 10 minutes. You go with Leanne. I'll take a different car." I nodded. By then, I had learned one thing. When the person protecting you speaks in short sentences, it's best not to ask extra questions. We humans have a habit of wanting long explanations during dangerous moments, like in a TV drama. By the time the explanation is over, the villain is already standing behind you. I didn't want to be that frustrating character. Almost 10 minutes later, Leanne's phone indicated the car had arrived. She looked at the screen, read the license plate, and said, "Silver sedan. Driver's name is Hank. We'll go down the back way." The evening wind blew through the empty courtyard, carrying the smell of dust and dry leaves. A silver sedan was parked at the curb, its turn signal blinking faintly. The driver rolled down the window, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. "You, Leanne?" he asked. I stopped. Leanne also paused for half a beat, but her expression remained neutral. I looked at the driver, trying to keep my voice natural. "Who are you looking for?" "Yeah, Leanne. You booked a ride to the East Point development, right?" I smiled faintly, my hand in my jacket pocket already tightening around the small phone. "Oh, right. But I forgot my briefcase upstairs. Can you wait 2 minutes?" The driver hesitated, his eyes darting quickly toward Leanne. "Sure, but please be quick. No parking here." "Okay, I'll be right back." I turned and walked slowly back inside. The moment I was out of the car's line of sight, I quickly texted Caleb just 3 words. "The red cardinal." It was our emergency signal. My heart was pounding so hard my fingers trembled as I typed. Leanne walked close beside me, her voice as low as a breath. "He used the wrong name for me." I nodded. "You've never used that name. Good catch. Don't look back." Less than a minute later, Caleb appeared from another hallway with 2 plainclothes officers. His face was ice. He didn't ask me anything, just gestured for us to step further inside. Everything happened very quickly. Just as the silver car was about to pull away, another vehicle blocked its path. Howard appeared from nowhere and wrenched open the driver's side door. The driver started to argue. What are you guys doing? I'm just a rideshare driver. Howard's voice was low and menacing. Get out of the car. The man's face went pale. Another officer opened the trunk. I stood behind the glass door, watching, my legs turning to ice. Inside the trunk was a black duffel bag. When it was opened, it revealed a set of women's clothing almost identical to what I was wearing. A scarf, an opened bottle of water, a few pills in an unlabeled blister pack, and an old phone. Caleb picked up the phone. The screen was still on. In the drafted messages was a single line. I'm going back to my husband's house to talk voluntarily. Please don't look for me. My chest tightened. If I had gotten into that car, in just a few hours, they would have had another story about me. This time, not a bride with mental issues, but a wife who voluntarily returned and then disappeared. Their evil wasn't loud. It was neat, with a pre-written text message for the victim. It was the devil's all-inclusive service. Leanne gently touched my wrist. Are you okay? I swallowed hard. Not okay, but I'm still standing. Caleb turned and looked at me for a few seconds. I knew he wanted to ask many things, but he just said, "You did the right thing." Those 5 words made me want to cry. Not because I was praised, but because for the first time I had recognized the trap myself before someone else pulled me out. The driver was detained for questioning. At first, he denied everything, claiming he got the ride request through an app. But a second phone in his pocket had a call history with an unknown number, made repeatedly in the 2 hours before the press conference. Howard glanced at the list, his expression darkening. There's a network behind this. Caleb nodded. Then, Howard's phone buzzed. He answered, speaking only a few short words. When he turned back, his voice was even lower. Caleb. Donovan and Julian just left the villa. Not heading to the office. They're going toward the old industrial park east of the city. Caleb immediately asked, How many cars? 2. One is Donovan's car. The other is a small truck following behind, probably carrying documents. I heard Julian's name and my heart still clenched, disgustingly. Some wounds are just stubborn. You know the person hurt you, but their name still causes pain. I gripped the arm of a chair. Julian went too? Caleb looked at me, his eyes not accusatory, just sad. Yes. That single word shattered the last of my illusions. I was moved to another small room to wait. Outside, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed constantly. Caleb conferred with the independent team. Howard reported the direction of movement. Leanne secured the data from the fake car. Everything was moving fast, and I sat in the middle of a bright white room, feeling like someone who had just escaped a deep pit only to find a massive chasm at her feet. A short while later, Caleb came in. His face was tense but very clear. You stay here with Leanne. My team and I have to go. I shot up. Go where? The old industrial park. It's possible they're destroying evidence. My voice trembled. Is it dangerous? He looked at me, not avoiding the question this time. It could be. But we have a team in place. I'm not going alone. I clenched my hands, my nails digging into my palms. Caleb. He paused. I know. I won't follow. I won't call around. I won't cause trouble. The corner of his mouth twitched, as if he wanted to smile but couldn't. Getting smarter. I took a deep breath. If you're almost tricked to death and don't get smarter, you're just insulting their performance. He looked at me for another second, then turned and left. The door closed behind him. I stood still for a long time. In the hallway, the sound of radios, phone calls, cars leaving, and Leanne speaking quietly to someone about backing up evidence. And in my heart, the image of that phone with the pre-written message kept replaying. They didn't just want me silent. They wanted me, or something that looked like me, to personally confirm that silence. That night, knowing Donovan and Julian were heading to the old industrial park, I understood my marriage was just a glossy coat of paint on a rotten door. Behind that door wasn't family, wasn't love, but a deep pit filled with fake documents, debt, and people willing to push others down to save themselves. I wasn't at the old industrial park that night. I just sat in the small room behind the conference center, hands wrapped around a cold cup of water, staring at the closed door. Leanne was beside me, occasionally answering her phone in a low voice. Every time her screen lit up, my heart jumped as if yanked by a string. They say waiting is torture. I agree. Especially when someone you love is walking into danger, and the man who was once your husband is on the other side. About an hour later, Leanne got a call. She listened without asking much, her expression changing almost imperceptibly. But I saw it immediately. Something happened, didn't it? She looked at me for a few seconds. Caleb's team has reached the warehouse. Just stay calm. I gave a bitter laugh. Stay calm must be the most useless phrase in the English language, but everyone loves to say it when someone else is about to lose their mind. Leanne sighed softly and put a hand on my shoulder. At least you can still be sarcastic. That means you haven't broken yet. Only later, through the words of Caleb, Howard, and documents released at trial, did I learn what really happened in that warehouse. The old industrial park was on the edge of the suburbs, full of abandoned factories with peeling walls and weeds growing head-high. The Apex warehouse was deep inside, with a sign for a defunct supply company hanging outside. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than the carcass of a factory forgotten by time. But inside, the lights were on. Donovan Croft stood in the middle of the warehouse in a black coat, a phone in his hand. Julian was beside him, his face pale, tie loosened, looking nothing like the gentle groom who had held my hand on the wedding stage. Two trusted employees were dragging box after box of files out from a small back room. One asked, "Mr. Chairman, are we really burning everything? This includes the original contracts for the Moonlight Cove project." Donovan's voice was cold. "If the originals still exist, we're all dead. Burn them." Julian, standing nearby, his voice trembling. "Dad, what about Mom? She's being dragged through the mud everywhere. If we don't handle the media now..." Donovan turned to his son. Just one look, and Julian fell silent. "Save the papers first. We'll deal with the people later." Hearing that sentence retold later, I sat in silence for a long time. It turned out I wasn't the only pawn in the Croft family. Eleanor, Julian, even their family's reputation were all just things to be sacrificed if necessary. That man didn't build his house with bricks. He built his empire on greed and coldness. Julian bowed his head, his hands clenched. "How can you say that? Mom did everything for Apex." Donovan sneered. "If it's for Apex, she should know when to be quiet. You too. Stop putting on that cheap, lovesick face." Julian choked back a reply. "I never wanted to push Alara this far." Donovan stepped closer, his voice low. "But you did. Don't stand here playing the good guy. A Croft man, once he makes a move, doesn't turn back to cry over the prey." If I had heard that at that moment, my heart probably would have broken one more time. But thankfully, the human heart knows how to protect itself. It can't keep breaking forever. At some point, it just scars over so you can keep living. The file boxes were opened. Inside were inflated materials, contracts, ledgers of cash payments to corrupt officials, lists of subcontractors forced to sign bad deals, hard drives with transactions from shell companies, and the revised plans for the Moonlight Cove project. In it, my Riverside property was circled in red, with a note in ink. "Handle before second funding round." A crony brought over a can of gasoline. The acrid smell filled the warehouse. Julian took half a step back. "Dad, if we're caught destroying evidence." Donovan snatched a lighter from the man's hand. "If we're not caught, there is no evidence." He had just flicked open the lighter when the warehouse doors burst open. "Freeze! Everybody put your hands down." The shout echoed through the warehouse as law enforcement stormed in from two directions. Flashlight beams swept across the file boxes, across the gasoline stains on the concrete floor. Donovan's men panicked. One tried to run for a back door, but was immediately stopped. Julian collapsed next to an open file box, his mouth agape as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. Donovan, however, was different. He tried to maintain his composure, slowly raising his hands. "Officers, you've misunderstood. This is just old internal paperwork. We're cleaning out the warehouse." Howard, telling me this later, even smirked. "Cleaning house is right, a little too clean." An officer pointed to the gasoline can and the lighter in Donovan's hand and requested his cooperation. The entire scene was documented. Only then did Donovan's face finally change. Not much, but enough to see the mask of power begin to crack. People who spend their whole lives ordering others around often forget that when they're the ones told to stand still, their own hands can tremble. That night, all the file boxes, hard drives, ledgers, and storage devices in the warehouse were sealed. Not just thrown into bags, but each item was documented, photographed, and numbered with witnesses present. Caleb's words came back to me. For evidence to outlive a denial, it has to be collected the right way. From that warehouse, everything began to unravel like a pulled thread. Brian Keller, the bank vice president who was going to process my asset files, was suspended shortly after documents surfaced detailing irregular fund releases to Apex. Dr. Adam Cole was summoned for questioning about my fake psychological profile and several similar medical reports used in other disputes. Lawyer Atherton was apprehended as he was preparing to leave the country. His suitcase contained foreign currency, personal documents, and an encrypted hard drive. The truth, like a needle in a haystack, eventually pokes through. It's just a shame the Croft family's needles came out as a whole bundle. The loan sharks who had threatened my Aunt Carol were also rounded up. The predatory loan agreements, the threatening phone calls, the text messages forcing her to follow a script, it was all gradually collected. 2 days later, my aunt came to see me. She stood outside the safe house door, gaunt, her eyes sunken. The moment she saw me, she didn't dare step inside. She clutched an old cloth bag, her voice trembling. "Alara, can I just say a few words to you?" I stood in the doorway, looking at the woman who had hugged me after my mother's funeral. My heart ached, but it wasn't soft like before. "Come in, Aunt Carol." The moment she stepped inside, she burst into tears and dropped to her knees on the floor, startling me. "I was wrong, Alara. They forced me. They threatened to destroy my stall. They threatened my son Tyson. I was so scared. I just read from the paper they gave me." I looked at her, my throat tight. Having a relative kneel before you isn't always a moment of triumph. Some wounds haven't even scabbed over, and seeing the person who caused them cry just makes you tired. I said slowly, "Get up. I don't want anyone kneeling in front of me." She shook her head, sobbing. "I failed your mother. When she died, I promised I would love you, but..." I cut her off, my voice colder than I intended. "You loved me, but when they needed someone to say I was unstable, you still said it." Aunt Carol bowed her head, ashamed. "I know. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'll confess everything. Who gave me the money, who gave me the script, who called and threatened me. I'll tell them everything." I was silent for a long time. Eleanor's words echoed in my head. Blood is thicker than water, after all. That drop of blood was real, but when mixed with fear and debt, it could turn just as murky. "Finally," I said, "just tell the truth. We can talk about family later." Aunt Carol looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, but this time, I didn't step forward to help her up. I didn't hate her enough to want her to drown in her guilt, but I was no longer the niece who could forget every knife wound at the sound of a single sob. Outside, the Apex warehouse was sealed. The people who thought they could use money, tears, and power to rewrite reality were finally starting to be dragged down by their own paperwork. As for me, I understood very clearly. The road ahead still had interrogations, a trial, and denials. But from the night that warehouse door was kicked open, the Croft family was no longer looking down on us from above. They had started to fall. The first time I saw Julian Croft again was in a bright white interrogation room. He was much thinner, the clothes hanging loosely on his frame, his eyes sunken. His hands, placed on his knees, were trembling. The moment I walked in, Julian shot to his feet. If an officer hadn't restrained him, he probably would have lunged toward me. "Alara, please, let me explain." I sat down, placing both hands on the table. It was strange. I thought I would be shaking, but looking at the man who had slept beside me on my wedding night, all I felt was a cold, empty space. Julian started to cry. "I really loved you. I swear I really loved you. At first, I was just going along with my parents, but the more time I spent with you, the more I cared. I was forced into it, Alara. I was afraid Apex would collapse, afraid my parents would go to jail, afraid of losing everything." I looked at him for a long time. "You were afraid of losing everything, so you chose to let me lose my dignity, my assets, and my entire life." Julian hung his head. "I didn't think it would go this far." I gave a bitter laugh. That's what everyone who holds a knife says after they've stabbed someone. "You knew I was innocent, yet you let them set the trap, so your love couldn't save me. It just made your crime more cowardly." Julian looked up, tears streaming down his face, but his tears couldn't touch me anymore. Eleanor Croft was different. When she was brought in for questioning, she didn't cry. Her hair had more gray in it, but her eyes were still sharp and cold. She looked me up and down, a sneer on her lips. "The ungrateful orphan. My family gave you a name, and you turned around and bit us." I heard the word orphan, and my heart still twinged. But this time, I didn't look down. "The name you gave me was a trap." She laughed. "You think you're so valuable? If it wasn't for that piece of land, do you think you could have ever stepped foot in the Croft house?" The room fell silent. Her own arrogance had torn the last of her masks to shreds. When questioned about the prenuptial agreement, She said in a fit of rage, "I called her daughter. I gave her a bracelet. Of course she'd believe me." The girl was desperate for a mother. A few sweet words and she melts. "I told my husband we shouldn't have been so direct. If we had just handled it cleanly from the start instead of staging that ridiculous adultery scene." I sat in silence. Not because it didn't hurt, but because some words are so toxic, you just have to let them expose themselves. Donovan Croft came in last. He still tried to maintain an air of calm. He claimed the marriage trap was his wife and son's idea, and that he was just a businessman whose subordinates had misled him. But the ledgers from the warehouse, the encrypted hard drive, the testimonies from his lawyer, the notary, Mrs. Tierney, and the bank data had blocked every one of his escape routes. A man who spends his life on high ground for too long often forgets that the earth remembers every footprint. The trial took place a few months later. That day, I wore a cream-colored blouse, and my hair was tied back neatly. Caleb sat behind me. Howard, Mrs. Tierney, and even Aunt Carol were there as witnesses or persons of interest. I was no longer the bride who cried on her wedding night, but I wasn't so strong that I couldn't feel pain. I had just learned how to feel pain and still speak every sentence clearly. Before the court, I laid out the timeline. Meeting Julian, Eleanor's grooming, signing the agreement, being taken from the villa on my wedding night, the fake psychological profile, the doctored video, the bank documents, and the attempt to abduct me with the fake car. Julian's lawyer asked, "Miss Vance, do you admit the signature on the prenuptial agreement is yours?" I answered, "Yes." "So you signed it voluntarily." I looked directly at the judge. Voluntary consent is only meaningful when the person signing knows the truth. I signed under conditions of an organized deception. The courtroom quieted. I heard someone behind me sigh. The prosecutor presented the chain of evidence. The prenuptial agreement with its unusual clauses, the recordings from Mrs. Tierney's USB, Howard's testimony, the forensic report on the video, the fake psychological profile from Dr. Cole, the bank data from Brian Keller, the papers from the warehouse, the cash payment ledgers, and the transactions through the shell companies. The verdict was read late that afternoon. Donovan Croft received a life sentence after his various economic crimes, conspiracy to destroy evidence, and related charges were combined. Eleanor Croft received 17 years for her role as an active accomplice in fraud, slander, media manipulation, and organizing the trap for her daughter-in-law. Julian Croft received 19 years for his direct participation in the scheme to defraud, use of forged documents, and aiding in the destruction of evidence. The lawyer, the doctor, the banker, and others involved received their own corresponding sentences. As he was being led away, Julian turned back and called to me, "Alara, you still love me, right?" I looked at him, strangely calm. "From the day you used the word love to lead me into a trap, you lost the right to call me Alara." Julian froze. Eleanor turned and cursed at me, but her voice was lost in the sound of footsteps and the closing of the courtroom doors. Donovan said nothing. For the first time, he truly looked like a defeated man. After the trial, I wasn't immediately okay. Some nights, I'd jolt awake at the sound of a knock on the door. Sometimes, seeing a thick stack of papers would make my hands tremble. If an older woman at the market called out, "Honey," I would choke up for a few seconds. A wound to the heart isn't a switch you can just flip off. Anyone who says just forget it and move on has probably never been betrayed by their own trust. I left Boston for a while and went to a small town by the sea. During the day, I'd walk along the shore, and at night I'd write down everything that had happened. I wrote to remember, but also to purge the poison from my soul. A year later, I returned. I sold a portion of my stocks and bought a small condo in the suburbs. I worked as an accountant for a private library. Beside the porch, I planted a trellis of climbing roses, near where a red cardinal often visited. Every time I saw it, I remembered the code that saved my life. But I also remembered that the person who ultimately had to walk through the final door was me. Caleb comes over for dinner sometimes. He still makes soup that's either too salty or too bland, but I eat all of it. Howard retired and now grows orchids in the countryside. Mrs. Tierney opened a small diner near the market, and her 2 children were given support to attend vocational school, and are doing well. Aunt Carol lives more quietly now, and often visits my parents' graves. I don't call it forgiveness yet. I just don't want my heart to be imprisoned by resentment any longer. There is no shame in being deprived of love. But to hand over your documents, your dignity, and your fate for someone else to hold because of that deprivation, that is when you must wake up.